No matter what your current role is or which plans you have within the industries, you won't be disappointed today. We have a true expert with us, Jenna Drenten. She's Associate Professor of Marketing at the Quinlan School of Business of Loyola University in Chicago. Her academic work centers on digital consumer culture and communication. She investigates how influencers and social media platforms shape consumer behavior and social dynamics in daily life. Welcome and good morning, Jenna. In Chicago, it's now only 6:30 in the morning. So thanks so much for joining us at this early hour. We are really thrilled to have you with us today, and we look forward to your presentation. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say welcome to everybody and thank you certainly to the Nuremberg Institute for Market Decisions and to Christine for your work as managing editor on this issue and Vanessa for hosting the Lunch and Learn today. It is early here, but I know afternoon for many of you. So thank you for joining during your lunchtime. Um, I really love that opening poll to see kind of where everyone is situated. I think it's interesting that only two people said that they are influencers, because one of the things I'll talk about today is how so many of us are actually doing the work of influencing, whether we're getting paid partnerships or not. So a lot of the content that we put online, there's sort of a blurriness between what a traditional influencer is and the everyday content that we're all sharing. So with that, we'll get into our presentation today. So as Christine alluded to, there is a perception that the creator economy and the influencer industry is this glamorous lifestyle. And while the creator economy does have some aspects of that, it's also very precarious. And a lot of what we think of as influencer marketing, we tend to think of as sort of a side hustle. It's a work that we do on the side of a regular job. And that's not always the case anymore. So the days of sort of posting content for fun, maybe getting some brand deals here and there, has now become a fully professionalized industry, one in which it sounds like many of you are at least dipping your toe into or interested in learning more about. And so it's, $1 billion global industry that has really taken over how we approach marketing in today's culture. However, the infrastructure really hasn't kept pace with the momentum of the industry. So most creators essentially operate as independent contractors. They don't have health benefits, they don't have job security, they don't have parental leave, they don't really have a reliable income. It's very much based on the whims of the audience and what potential brand deals they may get. And they're often at the mercy of algorithms on these digital platforms, which I'll talk about a little bit more today. So unlike traditional creative industries, when we think about things like traditional advertising or film media, the world doesn't really have built-in safety nets. There's no union. There's very minimal ethical standards. And the saying of sort of it's the wild, wild west really applies to influencer culture and the influencer industry, despite the fact that when we think about platforms like YouTube, for instance, it's been around for over 2 decades now at this point. So we think influencer is new. It's not really new in the grand scheme, but we're still kind of trying to figure out some of those safety nets. So as marketers, if we want to be responsible marketers, and I'll say that Loyola University Chicago is a Jesuit Catholic institution, we really pride ourselves on social justice, and that's the type of work that I do, and doing good for people. And if we want to be responsible marketers, that means that we really want to truly build with creators and not be exploitative in how we're partnering with them. So not just using them as tools for reach, we also need to begin treating them as humans and not just content machines churning out, Instagram images and YouTube content for a particular brand. So that's really what today's session is about and what motivated a lot of the special issue. I'm really fortunate and grateful to have the opportunity to have served as the guest editor for this special issue because I was encouraged to lean into these topics, that it's not all glamour all the time, but there is a dark side, and we have to be responsible in how we're addressing those issues head on. So today we're going to look at the evolution of the influencer economy and how it's shifted from sort of this novelty aspect to really a necessity in marketing, and how we can reframe our strategies from this idea of clout chasing to more community building. So I want to start with sort of where we've been in the history of influencer marketing so that we can better understand how to shape where we're going moving forward. So one of the things that really set influencer marketing apart from the outset, relative to traditional advertising or marketing, is the relationship. And in academia, sometimes we refer to this as parasocial relationships. And it's this idea that you can sort of have a one-sided relationship. Right now, I can't see any of you. You can see me. So it feels a little bit like maybe you know me more than I know you. And that's how influencer is as well, that you feel like you maybe have a relationship with these influencers, even though they don't necessarily know you personally. And that really shifted when we think about sort of traditional celebrity to now with influencer sort of celebrity. It used to be very one-sided, but now we have in the comments conversations happening. We have, influencers responding to fans. And so this idea of a relationship was really central to what made influencer marketing distinct relative to other existing forms of marketing. So influencers really build audiences, not just with their content, but with the trust that they build in the communities around them. They share their lives. The followers feel like they know them, and that intimacy, when influencer marketing originated about 2 decades ago, uh, made people more willing to try what these influencers were recommending, because it felt like they were a friend, giving them some insights on a product or brand that they really liked. And that core idea today hasn't shifted fundamentally. People still trust people and less so logos. And that is really the fundamental crux of influencer, that it's really about the community and the people that are involved, less so than it is, or more than it is around logos. So creators act as sort of emotional currency in this economy for brands. When you collaborate with a content creator or an influencer, you're not just borrowing their audience, you're tapping into that relationship that they've really spent a lot of time nurturing, that they've built these relationships over time, built that trust, and that's what you're buying into as a brand to get access to that community. But here's the big shift. So it's no longer about sort of the biggest audience or who has the most followers. It's really about building the deepest connection. And this is where we see things like micro influencers become increasingly important. That you may have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 followers and not be seen as sort of a big fish in the influencer world, but have a really committed following that's incredibly engaged, really trusts that influencer, and has a deep connection with them. That makes a big significant difference in today's influencer culture. The idea of sort of trust and transparency will always outperform this concept of trend hijacking. So it's really obvious when brands are sort of just jumping on the bandwagon, or you might say brand wagon. It's important that it's a trust first and transparent experience rather than just sort of the new next now approach. So building a fan base, my item 3 here, we can kind of think of it as the idea of compound interest. It takes time, but it pays off more in the long run. So again, these influencers are really putting in this investment up front in their fan base and in their community to curate the trust and the following that they have. And then later, when those brand deals come along, that's essentially what brands are paying for. It's not for just a placement on a page. You're paying for access to that community and tapping into the trust that that influencer has built over time. So yes, authenticity still matters, but it's not, and a big following, but it's not necessarily about mass appeal. It's more about this idea of emotional resonance. And so brands, benefit from today thinking smaller and deeper, and more micro niche approach to influencers to make their dollars go forward or further, essentially. So you can see on this figure here, and this is one of the images from our special issue, the sort of the spectrum of influencer marketing. We have these big influencers that have a huge following, very professionalized. Maybe they have a team of people who are working around them. You can think of folks like Mr. Beast, for example. And then we have these sort of everyday semi-professional folks that are posting content about things that they're passionate about, and they build a really, really deep connection with a very committed following. Both are still important in influencer marketing today, but we've seen the shift over time where it's not about sort of the biggest, it's about the most trustworthy and deepest connections that influencers have. Another big shift that I want to switch to now is looking at who's actually doing the following. So I want to address this idea of sort of the follower era. And this is one of the big fundamental changes, that this idea of the follower era is over. So there was a time when influencer was really directly tied to who you followed. So if you think about classic Twitter, now X, it was very chronological when it was originally launched. Your Facebook timeline was really based on friends that you knew in real life, that you were connected with. On YouTube, one of the earliest platforms in influencer culture, it was based on the creators who you subscribe to. So you really had to opt in to influencers that you or content that you wanted to see. But that's not really how the internet works anymore. Short form video has fundamentally shifted this, and changes in algorithms have fundamentally shifted this. So today, platforms really prioritize interest over identity. For example, your feed on TikTok or Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts isn't really a reflection necessarily of who you follow. It's more a reflection of what the algorithm thinks will hold your attention. And that attention piece and those eyeballs that are on content are what is most important. So it's less about who and more about your interests, where the algorithm gets to know you really, really, really well and says, this is the type of content we think you might like. So the algorithm is essentially the new audience in influencer marketing. So TikTok is probably the clearest example of this. You could have 0 followers on TikTok and get 10 million views on a post overnight if that content takes off. And opposite, you could have millions of followers and maybe nobody watches a video that you post and it might flop. So that really has shifted what it means for content creators, and then by proxy, what it means for marketers. And this means that loyalty does not guarantee visibility. So creators really have to build content that performs with essentially strangers, not necessarily the audience that they've spent time curating, but also thinking about who might stumble across their content and be interested in it. And so brands then have the responsibility to build campaigns with that in mind, thinking about what discoverability means, not just being sort of delivered to a follower base. So we have this tension where the relationship is still really important and you're tapping into the trust and transparency that an influencer has built. And we have to think about the way that the algorithm works in looking at this idea of sort of stumble upon discoverability with strangers who are not part of that influencer's direct community and committed community. So a great example of this is niche creators who maybe have no name recognition, but then suddenly become like a household name. One of the examples a few years ago, there was a guy who took off on TikTok that was skateboarding and drinking a cranberry cocktail drink. And people really loved his videos, and the company swooped in and said, we're going to now sponsor you. And so things, he wasn't a content creator. He just liked skateboarding around California, and companies can kind of tap into the moment outside of a community being built already, which is a little bit different than it has been. So a key takeaway here is that brands and creators need to build for discoverability and not just loyalty. So that means that every piece of content that a creator makes or a brand solicits in partnership has to be thought of in some ways as standalone. I'll talk at the end today a little bit about this idea of serialized content and sort of the shift that we're seeing toward ongoing content. But we still have to think about, it's almost like episodes of a TV show that you're watching one off. And if you haven't watched the previous one or the one after that, you can still tap into what the influencer is posting, because in today's influencer economy, it's less about reach of the influencer, more about sort of who finds them, discoverability. So another big shift related to the follower era is, if they are no longer sort of these followers, who are they? And one of the things that I talk about in the special issue is this idea of the chronically online consumer. So if platforms are built for discoverability, what exactly or who exactly are we trying to reach then? So meet the chronically online consumer. Some of you may have heard this term before, and it used to be sort of a sarcastic insult, but really it reflects a shift in consumer behavior. So chronically online consumers are those who are always connected. They live and breathe the digital culture. They are people who are fluent in sort of niche aesthetics and memes, and subcultures on TikTok. This idea of if you know, online really reflects who the chronically online consumer is. And so people are posting, remixing, commenting, really deeply ingrained in sort of the niche underbelly of digital content online, even if they're not directly engaged, that they kind of keep up with it almost like their favorite TV show or favorite movie or a news cycle. So these consumers are really expecting brands to be in on the joke as well, that they expect brands to understand that they are deeply online. And so brands also need to be deeply online. But this can become a bit of a web for brands that they could get caught in, because it could come across as disingenuous if your brand isn't really in on the joke, but tries to hijack that trend or sort of be cooler than they are. So if they're trying too hard, it falls flat. But consumers also expect them to really get what's happening in digital culture. These chronically online consumers expect immediacy and instant gratification. They reward cultural relevance, and they are the ones that are shaping what stories sort of rise to the top online, not just consuming what brands push out, but really being the ones telling brands, this is the type of content that we're interested in, what we want to see and engage with. So it gets a little bit more interesting because, as I mentioned in the beginning, some of you said, only a few of you said that you're influencers, but we're all kind of content now. So this is something that really stems from the idea of constant surveillance in digital culture. I was interviewed a few years ago by a reporter at the platform BuzzFeed, and was talking about this idea that we're constantly being watched and constantly watching others online. And I called it surveillance. She came up with this great term, the panopticontent, a play on the panopticon and kind of classic surveillance culture, and merged with digital content. So this idea of the panopticontent is this sort of self-induced surveillance state where everything and everyone is potentially content and fodder for the internet, whether we want to be or not. So some of you may have seen or scrolled past content before where people are just being filmed on the streets doing something, kind, or doing something outrageous. And so that's this idea where anyone can become an online celebrity with or without their permission almost instantaneously in today's culture. So it's not just influencers that are in the spotlight. It's, your local barista, it's your dog walker, it's a random stranger on the train into work in the morning. And it's all of us. It's not just these sort of traditional influencers. And with that, then everyone sort of becomes a potential marketer, a consumer, and a story for the internet. And we're all playing these roles at all times. And that really changes the nature of what we think about as authenticity, along with things like privacy and what it means to have influence. And it changes about who we even think about as an influencer. So today in influencer culture, it's kind of less about who you are and more about the content that you make or what other people see you as for potential content. So I've posted a couple examples here that we talk about in the special issue. Some of you might not know on the middle here, this young gentleman with the blonde hair, Logan's Feud is his handle. And he became sort of Instagram famous and TikTok famous for making things out of cucumbers. Like that was his whole shtick, was just cucumber recipes, how to make cucumbers taste better. And a few videos took off, and he's been interviewed later saying, I kind of have to do cucumber content now. Like, this is what people expect of me. And to now potentially pivot, you're a bit locked into that niche. In the center is a young woman by the name of Angelica Hicks. And she's become very famous for creating celebrity outfits out of trash. And so if it's on the Met Gala, runway, if it's something at the Oscars or the Grammys or in a movie, she will recreate an outfit of a celebrity out of just little bits of trash here and there. And people are very impressed with her creativity and the content that she makes. Then my last one here, Sabrina Breyer is a comedian, and her content really took off around these skits being that friend. And so people found it very relatable and shareable because they related to being sort of the friend who, maybe is going to spill all of the rumors that are going around, or the friend who's telling you, I want to talk about this later, but with a wink and a nudge. And people, were able to share that and say, oh my gosh, this is us. And so she's really taken off. But in all three of these cases, these are incredibly niche consumer areas. And this reflects that idea of chronically online content, because we know those individuals by the content that they create, less so about kind of their lifestyle and those sort of holistic perspective of what an influencer used to be, where we would maybe see them traveling and with their family. Certainly those influencers still exist, but we now have these really niche micro specific influencers where maybe their names are secondary, but their content is what becomes really iconic. And so that's the shift. It's more about kind of sticky stories and sticky content and less about maybe influencer household names as we think about the future and building sort of cultural fluency as a brand and understanding the shift where a brand sort of gets it with chronically online consumers. And so with that, if chronically online consumers are shaping what it means to be influenced, what does that mean for how we approach them through influencer marketing? So it kind of means that the playbook has to be rewritten. For years, traditional influencer marketing was a lot like traditional advertising. It wasn't that significantly different. It was just filtered through a more relatable face. So sort of an everyday person rather than the big time celebrity was the one sharing a brand to try or a product to test out. So in the past, it was like very polished photo dumps or curated what they call flat lays, where products are nicely laid out on a table. Very highly scripted campaigns and campaign briefs that were provided. And certainly that version of influencer marketing still exists, but it doesn't really speak to today's hyper fast digital, hyper chronically online consumer in the same way, where they're expecting you to jump on the on board with understanding the culture of digital influence almost immediately. And so the audience doesn't really want perfection. They want it to be playful. They want you to show that you're in on it as a brand, and that brands can be sort of quirky and participatory in this culture and more culturally fluent and a little less polished, that they're willing to experiment and try things out. And that requires, from a functional perspective, a lot quicker legal review and a lot more risk taking on behalf of the brand, because you don't have the long lead time of months of prep for a campaign. So this audience doesn't really want, perfection. And we can kind of contrast traditional influencer marketing with this idea of chronically online influencer marketing, where first it was, very polished and perfect, and now it's a little bit more quirky and weird. And so we might make some content that doesn't speak to an entire audience, but speaks to one specific consumer or one specific niche audience very, very carefully. It's gone from very scripted to much more spontaneous. Brands are handing over the reins to content creators a lot more, which takes, some level of risk, but often has a big reward. It also has, as I mentioned previously, shifted from a more mass appeal to these more niche communities where the audience doesn't want to see content for everyone. They want to feel like content is being created for them specifically, and they get it, that it's, very much a reflection of who they are, not who everyone is. And then lastly, it's kind of gone from this sort of brand owned content that's very proprietary to more of a participatory approach that's fan inspired. So brands are having to listen to influencers much more now than in the past. So influence, I want to shift gears a little bit now to sort of the dark side and negative trade-offs of influencer marketing. Yes, it can be very innovative and fun and playful and positive, but we also have to recognize the dark side and the cost, and that, specifically the human cost. So the truth is, as I mentioned in the beginning, and Christine alluded to this as well, the influencer marketing is really built on fragile ground. When influencer marketing started out, it was, everyday people, and they don't have agents and representatives who are doing their bidding and negotiating and protection, PR groups. Many influencers get to that point, but it's certainly not how they start out. And so they're caught up in the reality of things like harassment and burnout and exploitation and really significant mental health risks that we're seeing crop up in influencers and among content creators, in particular among women, content creators of color, LGBTQ plus content creators who are disproportionately targeted by harassment, and more likely to be affected by burnout among influencers. And this goes back to that idea of surveillance, that they're constantly being watched and therefore constantly performing. And so their livelihoods are dependent on keeping an audience happy. But with that you're always on. You never kind of get to take a break, because your life becomes what your livelihood is. And in the comments section, for instance, and we have an article in the special issue that really speaks to this, it might seem like a minor tension, but the idea of whether or not in what comment you respond to, and if things are really going haywire in the comments where people are being are trolling or harassing, and being really negative and harmful, there's this trade-off of I'm supposed to engage because that's what gets my content to go viral, but this is really harmful to my mental health to see all of these comments coming in. And so content creators are really at the whim of the audience and the algorithm. They can lose favor very quickly, and there's a lot of pressure on them. So with this, brands have to think about not mental health as an afterthought, but really part of your strategy from day one. So that is a really, heavy topic. And we have several articles in the special issue that discuss it. And it should be a heavy topic that needs to have more attention given. And we can't talk about influencer marketing without talking about influencer well-being. So it's no longer kind of this nice to have. We have to think of it as sort of an ethical imperative when we approach influencer marketing, is thinking of them as humans and not just essentially a billboard that we're selling products through. But the good news is when we do create content through with partners that are deeply embedded in these digital platforms, influencers can be one of the most powerful strategic approaches to marketing if we do it right. So I just, want to keep that in mind of how important it is to think about influencers as humans and their mental health and well-being and what that means for brands as well. And then if we're doing this well and really being responsible in how we're partnering with influencers, then we can really stay current as brands in this digital landscape. So when influencer marketing works, influencers do a lot of things better than anyone else or any other marketing channel that you might use. Um, so they are uniquely great at things like inspiration. They don't just show products, they are really telling a story around that product and create immersive experiences that are aspirational and relatable, and very importantly, shareable. They offer a lot of guidance to consumers and to their audience. So they are treated sort of like friends who give advice. And they can simplify complex things and complex products for an audience in a way that perhaps a print ad or a billboard or a television ad can't. And that goes back to that concept of trust in this sort of relationship building over time. They provide a lot of decision support for their audience. So when consumers get overwhelmed by the choices in the market, which is very easy to do because there are so many different retailers and vendors in today's market, the influencers really provide support for having sort of curated picks that they recommend. And then lastly, they help mitigate a lot of buyer's remorse and help their followers and their audience feel better and more comfortable with the decisions that they make. So they're giving them this real-time reassurance through how they engage with their audience. So understanding there are those trade-offs where influencer can go awry and can be really harmful and negative because it's a precarious industry. If you're doing it well, they really offer a lot for the audience that you're trying to reach. So I want to offer a couple different practical tips of where we think maybe influencer culture is going in the future. First is thinking like a series or offering serialized content that really plays on character arcs, having consistency over time, content that sort of builds. And as I mentioned, that it still has to stand alone as a one-off, but it might then motivate someone to go watch the previous videos or see previous content, and then stick around for what's to come. So not thinking about it just being a one-off, but thinking about serialized content over the course of time that might lock someone in to go back and see, a brand partnership with an influencer build content previously or after that. The next one is this idea of making audio visual. So we've seen many of you might watch your TikTok videos or YouTube videos with captions on. And so this is this idea of sort of, even like podcasts being visual, that we're recording video of podcasts and that now becomes content. And so shifting across different platforms, it's not just about having a podcast, not just about having TikTok, but how can we use one for the other? Next, organic content is a little bit dying. It's not dead. It's not, maybe going to go to the wayside, but because this is becoming a professionalized industry, it's really important that influencers are paid for the work that they do and that they're involved from the outset in creating that content and being compensated fairly for it. And then lastly, we certainly can't go through this without talking about the rise of AI. And it's really important that given so much artificial intelligence and GPT models that are being used to create content, that brands and content creators maybe lean into live content that is unscripted and feels a little bit more authentic and raw relative to something that is that perfectly polished content. In our special issue, we offer a lot more practical strategies. There's a great article at the end, an interview with an expert in the industry, Molly Tellis, who offers a lot of great recommendations for influencer campaigns. So I certainly encourage all of you to check that out. And just to leave you with some last key takeaways, thinking about the idea of how the influencer industry has changed from being very professionalized now, but it's also still very precarious. The idea of trust mattering always, the role of the algorithm rather than just the follower, this rise of a new chronically online consumer. The authenticity isn't just about being polished, it's about this participatory culture, really paying attention to the risks that influencers and creators face and what brands can't do that influencers can. Some key things that are maybe down the pipeline in influencer culture, and then certainly always respecting influencers as creative professionals themselves. So with that, I want to encourage all of you to download the special issue. We have a set of excellent articles from academic experts and practitioners around the world. And there's, great practical strategies and also really key cutting edge academic insights that are translated for how your brands might be able to use this information. So thank you very much.